The termination letter was still warm from the printer when Nathan Colby walked out of Meridian Health Systems for the last time, carrying nothing but a manila folder of personal documents and the small paper crane his 8-year-old son had folded and left on his desk 3 weeks earlier, because, the boy had said, it was supposed to bring good luck. It hadn't. Behind him, through the tall glass doors, Nathan could hear the muffled sounds of his former colleagues continuing their afternoon as though nothing had happened. Keyboards clicking. A phone ringing twice then going quiet. Someone laughing near the copy machine. The ordinary sounds of a Tuesday that had just become the worst day Nathan had experienced since the hospital called him 4 years ago to say his wife wasn't coming home. He stood in the parking lot for a long moment, not moving, just holding the folder against his chest like a shield. A cold October wind came through the trees lining the entrance road. Somewhere in the middle of the folder, behind his employee ID badge and a photo of his son, was a single printed page explaining that his position as senior financial auditor at Meridian Health Systems had been eliminated due to organizational restructuring. That was the phrase they used. Organizational restructuring. As if his 12 years of service, his late nights, his careful work catching the billing errors that had once saved the company nearly $4 million in federal penalties, as if all of that could be dissolved with 2 words and a signature from someone he had never once met. Nathan did not cry in the parking lot. He had learned, in the 4 years since losing Laura, that grief of any kind tended to wait for quiet moments. It would find him later, probably around midnight, sitting at the kitchen table after his son was asleep. He got in his car, put the folder on the passenger seat, and called the after-school program at Riverside Elementary. "This is Nathan Colby," he said when someone picked up. "Ethan's dad. I'm going to be picking him up early today." There was a short pause. "Of course, Mr. Colby, he's in the art room. We'll let him know." Nathan drove the 20 minutes to the school, without turning on the radio. Ethan was 7 when Laura died, and 8 now, old enough to understand that something permanent had happened to their family. But young enough that he still sometimes called out for his mother in his sleep. Nathan had learned to wake at the sound. He would sit on the edge of Ethan's bed in the dark, saying nothing, just resting a hand on the boy's back until the breathing evened out again. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. A place Nathan had moved into after selling the house, because the mortgage payments had become impossible on a single income, with mounting medical debt from Laura's final months. The apartment was clean and warm, and decorated mostly with Ethan's artwork taped to every available wall. Paper animals lined the windowsills. A solar system hung from the ceiling of the boy's bedroom on fishing wire, the planets slightly misshapen, because Ethan had painted them himself, and been very proud of the result. For 12 years at Meridian, Nathan had been the person nobody noticed until something went wrong. He was not loud. He did not take credit in meetings. He did not play golf with executives or attend the right happy hours. He simply sat in his corner office, a small corner office on the 4th floor, with a window that faced a concrete wall, and he worked. He found discrepancies in insurance billing that no one else caught. He built audit frameworks that the compliance team still used without knowing who had designed them. He flagged a Medicare reimbursement issue in 2019 that, had it continued, would have triggered a federal investigation. The vice president of finance had received a commendation letter for catching it. Nathan had received an email saying, "Great catch." He told himself it was fine, that the work mattered even when the recognition didn't. He told himself that every time a promotion went to someone louder, every time his name was left off a presentation he had essentially written, every time HR reminded him during reviews that he was meeting expectations. The same phrase, year after year, as though expectations were a ceiling rather than a floor. He had stayed because the benefits were good. Because Ethan's therapist was covered. Because walking away from stable employment, as a single father, felt like standing at the edge of something with no way to see the bottom. And then, they had walked away from him instead. When Ethan climbed into the car that afternoon, he immediately noticed his father's face. Kids do this. Parents forget sometimes how precisely children can read them. The slight tightness around the eyes, the way a smile doesn't quite reach. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his backpack on his lap, watching his father pull out of the school parking lot. "Did something happen?" he asked. Yeah, buddy, Nathan said. I'll tell you about it at home. Ethan nodded and looked out the window. After a minute he said, Can we still get tacos on Friday? Nathan exhaled something that was almost a laugh. Yeah, we can get tacos on Friday. At home that evening, Nathan explained things in the way he had learned to explain hard things to Ethan, straightforwardly, without dramatizing, without pretending. He told him that the company had let him go, that it wasn't about anything Nathan had done wrong, and that they were going to be okay, but that things might be different for a little while. Ethan listened with the serious expression he sometimes wore, the one that made him look briefly older than 8. Are we going to have to move again? He asked. I don't know yet, Nathan said, because he had promised Laura, in one of the last real conversations they'd had, that he would never lie to their son to make things easier, in the short term. Ethan thought about this. Then he went to his room and came back 5 minutes later, carrying another paper crane, this one slightly larger than the first, and set it carefully on the kitchen table in front of his father. For better luck, he said. Nathan picked it up. It was folded from the back page of a math worksheet, and there was still a half-finished multiplication problem visible on one wing. He put it next to the first one on the shelf by the door, where they keep the keys and the mail, and the small framed photo of Laura from the year before she got sick, laughing at something off camera, her hair pulled back, completely unaware that anyone was taking the picture. The months that followed moved in the strange compressed way that financial stress tends to create, each day feeling both too long and too short, full of small urgencies that crowded out everything else. Nathan applied for jobs. He made spreadsheets tracking every application, every response, every rejection. He took on freelance accounting work when he could find it, sitting at the kitchen table, after Ethan went to bed, working by lamplight, trying not to look at the numbers in the savings column too closely. He was good at what he did. He knew that, but the healthcare finance industry is smaller than it looks from the outside, and word travels. And when a company the size of Meridian lets someone go without explanation, other companies notice and ask questions that nobody answers directly. He started driving for a rideshare company on weekends when Ethan was at his grandmother's house. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself a lot of things that were true, but felt fragile, like paper in rain. One Saturday morning, a few weeks into this new life, he took Ethan to the farmer's market near their apartment. Something they had started doing together in the spring, partly because the produce was cheap enough, partly because Ethan had become inexplicably devoted to a vendor who sold handmade birdhouses, and always let the boy help sand the edges. They walked through the stalls in the autumn cold, Ethan in a jacket 2 sizes too big, that Nathan kept meaning to replace, and ate warm apple fritters from a paper bag, and for an hour Nathan did not think about money or employment, or the water heater, that had been making a sound for 3 weeks, that probably meant something expensive. He thought, this is the part of life that doesn't show up on a resume. He thought, Laura would have liked this morning. Inside the executive offices of Meridian Health Systems, the organizational restructuring that had ended Nathan's career was not going particularly well. Diane Foss had been CEO of Meridian for 3 years, having been recruited from a private equity-backed hospital network in Atlanta, where she had built a reputation for operational efficiency. She was 42 years old, precise in her language and expectations, and had transformed Meridian's revenue profiles significantly in ways that looked excellent in quarterly presentations. She was not cruel, but she was, as several former employees might have put it, a person who had long ago decided that the distance between herself and other people was a professional advantage, rather than a personal loss. She had signed off on the restructuring without reviewing individual files. That was HR's work. Her work was the strategy, until the federal audit notice arrived. It came on a Thursday morning in November, 6 weeks after Nathan's last day. A preliminary inquiry from the Office of Inspector General regarding Meridian's Medicare billing practices over the previous 3 fiscal years. The letter was 14 pages long and specific in ways that suggested the investigators had been looking for some time. Diane read it twice, then she called her compliance director. Walk me through our current audit documentation, she said. The internal reviews. Who built the framework? There was a pause on the other end of the line. That would have been Nathan Colby, her compliance director said carefully. He was the senior financial auditor. He was let go 6 weeks ago. Diane set the letter down on her desk. Get me his file. What she found, over the next 2 hours, with the letter sitting beside her, and 3 different compliance attorneys on a conference call, was the quiet architecture of 12 years of careful unrecognized work. The audit trails. The flagged discrepancies. The internal memos Nathan had written, precisely and without fanfare, detailing exactly the kinds of billing irregularities the OIG was now asking about. Memos that had been filed and largely ignored by the executives above him. There was a report from 2021, 47 pages long, that Nathan had apparently submitted to the VP of Finance, and that Diane had never seen, had never been shown. The compliance attorney on the call said, with practiced legal restraint, that it would be very helpful if this particular individual were still affiliated with the organization. Diane ended the call. She sat for a long moment looking at the window. Then she asked her assistant for Nathan Colby's last known address. She drove herself. She had not told anyone she was going, which was unusual enough that her assistant had looked up from her desk with visible surprise when Diane walked past without stopping. Diane did not explain. The address took her to a neighborhood she had driven through before, without looking at. The kind of street that exists in the middle of every mid-sized American city. The kind where the storefronts have been half-empty for years. And the apartment buildings are functional, but tired, their facades the color of old weather. She parked in a visitor space, and walked across the lot in her coat, her heels clicking on concrete that had been patched and patched again. She found the unit number, and knocked. There was a pause, and then the door opened, and Nathan Colby looked at her, with an expression she had not anticipated. Not anger, not surprise exactly, but a kind of still, level calm, that seemed to absorb her presence without reacting to it. He was wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was holding a dish towel. From somewhere behind him came the smell of something cooking, and the sound of a child's voice narrating something to itself. A game, or a story she couldn't tell. "Messieurs Foss," he said. "Nathan." She stopped. "I'm sorry to come without calling. I didn't have a personal number." "You could have gone through HR," he said, not unkindly. "I didn't want to go through HR." He studied her for a moment, then stepped back from the door. Not quite an invitation, but not a refusal either. She stepped in. The apartment stopped her in a way she hadn't expected. It was small, she took in its dimensions almost automatically, but it was full of things. Drawings on the walls, dozens of them, some framed, most just taped up with careful tape that had been pressed flat at the corners. Paper animals on the windowsill. Books stacked on every flat surface, half of them small and illustrated, half of them dense with numbers or engineering. On the shelf by the door were 2 paper cranes, one smaller than the other, arranged beside a framed photograph of a woman laughing. A boy appeared from the hallway. He was maybe 8 years old, wearing socks with dinosaurs on them, looking at Diane with the frank, uncomplicated curiosity that children deploy without social filter. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Diane said. "I'm Ethan. Are you a friend of my dad's?" She opened her mouth and found, to her own surprise, that she didn't have an answer. Nathan saved her. "She's someone from work, bud. Go check on the pasta." Ethan considered this then, turned and disappeared back into the kitchen. From behind the wall came the sound of him stirring something and singing a few bars of something unrecognizable. Diane turned back to Nathan. "We received the OIG notice," she said. "I know," he said. "I heard through someone still there. The compliance framework, the documentation you built. It's all in the system," he said. "It's all filed. I don't know if anyone ever read it." He said this without bitterness. That was the thing she kept being unable to account for. The absence of anger in him, the way he spoke about 12 years of being overlooked with the same quiet tone he might use to describe the weather. She told him what the attorneys had said. She told him the company needed someone who understood the audit history from the inside. Someone who could work with outside counsel and navigate the inquiry. She told him she was prepared to offer a consulting arrangement. Significant, well compensated, on his terms. Nathan leaned against the counter behind him, and listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "I appreciate you coming in person, I do. But," she said, "I spent 12 years at Meridian, choosing that work over the rest of my life," he said. "Over Ethan. Over being home before bedtime. Over being present in the way that." He stopped, glanced toward the kitchen. My wife died while I was in a budget review meeting that ran 3 hours over. I found out when I checked my phone on a bathroom break. He said it simply, not as an accusation. I'm not going back to that. Diane did not speak. From the kitchen, Ethan called out that the pasta was done, and asked if the lady was staying for dinner. Nathan raised an eyebrow at Diane, almost an apology. She said, "I'll see myself out." But she stood at the door for a moment longer than necessary, her hand on the frame, looking at the 2 paper cranes on the shelf, at the photograph of the woman laughing. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For your wife, and for the way things happened." Nathan nodded once. "Thank you." She left. She did not sleep well that night. This was not unusual for Diane. Sleep had been a managed activity for years, something she optimized with discipline and habit rather than experienced with ease. But that night was different. She lay in her penthouse apartment, the city spread silent and glittering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and she thought about the drawings on the walls of that apartment. The paper cranes. The photograph. She thought about the 47-page report that had been filed and ignored. She thought about the fact that she had signed a termination authorization for a man whose name she had not known until 6 weeks after he was gone. Diane Foss had been driven her entire career by the absolute conviction that personal feeling was noise, and that strategy was signal. Her father had raised her on that principle after her mother left. Had sat her down at age 11, and told her that sentiment was a luxury, and that capable people did not afford themselves luxuries. She had built an entire professional identity on that foundation. She had also, somewhere along the way, and without quite noticing, built very few other things. Her apartment was beautiful. There was no one in it. In the morning she called her general counsel, her compliance director, and her head of HR into a meeting that lasted 2 hours. She did not raise her voice. She was very specific. Nathan heard nothing for 10 days. In those 10 days he fixed a neighbor's car for $50, helped Ethan with a school project about the water cycle, replaced a broken window latch with a YouTube tutorial, and a hardware store trip, discovered that the water heater was indeed dying, and ate tacos with his son on Friday as promised. The truck on 5th Street, the one with the green awning, the one Laura had liked. He was not happy in any simple sense, but he was present in a way he had not been in years, and somewhere underneath the financial dread and the uncertainty was a kind of clarity he had forgotten existed. He was home when Ethan got off the bus. He was there for dinner. He was the one who sat on the edge of the bed in the dark when the boy called out in his sleep. On a Wednesday evening, while Ethan was at a neighbor's birthday party 2 buildings over, Diane knocked on Nathan's door again. She was not wearing the expensive coat this time. She was dressed more plainly. Slacks, a simple jacket, and she looked, Nathan thought when he opened the door, like someone who had not slept enough for a sustained period, and was attempting to carry this with dignity. She asked if she could come in. He let her. She sat at his kitchen table, the first time he had ever seen her sit anywhere, with no agenda on the surface in front of her. And she told him what she had done. The compliance overhaul she had initiated. The new audit protections. The internal review she had commissioned to document who had actually produced what work and when, including tracing the 2021 report back to its author. She told him she had restructured the finance and compliance leadership to separate them, which was something Nathan had recommended in a memo 3 years ago that nobody had acted on. "I'm not here to ask you back for the OIG matter," she said. "I have outside counsel for that. They're good. We'll manage." She paused. "I'm here because I want to offer you something different." She slid a folder across the table. He opened it. It was not what he expected. It was a newly created position, Director of Audit Integrity, reporting directly to the CTO, protected hours. A salary that reflected 12 years of backloaded value he had never been paid. A formal authorship provision, meaning that work he produced would carry his name, in writing, permanently. Benefits for Ethan through college. A clause that said, explicitly, that this role could never be eliminated without direct CEO review and a 60-day notice period. And at the bottom of the last page, below all the formal language, was a paragraph that was clearly not written by any attorney. The handwriting was Diane's, precise, slightly compressed, the handwriting of someone who writes fast because they are always thinking ahead. It said, "I have run this company by treating people as inputs and outputs. I was wrong to do that. I was wrong to do it to you specifically. What you built here over 12 years deserved recognition, and instead it was taken and filed and forgotten. I can't undo that. What I can offer is a different arrangement going forward, one where your name is on your work, your time belongs to you and your son, and the things you flag will be read. I'm asking for a second chance to be a better version of this company. And I'm asking because I think you're the kind of person who gives second chances, even when he doesn't have to. Nathan read it twice. He set it down on the table. He looked at the 2 paper cranes on the shelf by the door. You didn't have to write that, he said. No, she agreed. You could have just sent the contract through a recruiter. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. From outside came the distant sound of children, Ethan's voice somewhere in the mix. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes. Why did you come in person? Both times. She thought about this for a moment in a way that suggested she was not going to give him the professional answer. Because it felt like the only honest way to do it, she said finally, and because, she stopped, seemed to reconsider, then continued anyway. I sat in my apartment that night, after the first time I came here, and I looked around and I thought about that photograph on your shelf. The woman laughing. She looked at the table surface. I don't think anyone has ever taken a photograph of me laughing without me knowing they were there. The kitchen was very quiet. Nathan said, her name was Laura. She looked like someone worth knowing, Diane said. He nodded. She was. Another silence, not uncomfortable. The kind that comes between people when something real has been said, and both of them are letting it settle. I'm not going to say yes tonight, Nathan said. I'm not asking for tonight. I need to think about it, and talk to Ethan. You ask your son about career decisions, she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. I ask my son about anything that affects him, Nathan said. That was something I got very wrong for a long time. I'm trying not to get it wrong anymore. Diane nodded slowly, looking at him in a way that was not the way she looked at potential hires or organizational assets. It was more like the way people look at something they are only just beginning to see clearly. She stood to leave. At the door she paused as she had the first time, and looked at the shelf, the cranes, the photograph, the key hooks. The paper cranes, she said. Did he make those? He did, Nathan said. For luck, did it work? Nathan considered. Ask me in 6 months. She almost smiled. He almost did too. She left, and Nathan stood in the doorway watching her walk across the parking lot. Head up, steps measured, a person who had spent a very long time, keeping herself together, and was perhaps, in some small and recent way, beginning to wonder what it might feel like to let something in instead. Ethan came home 40 minutes later with frosting on his jacket, and an opinion about the birthday cake. Too sweet, he announced, which was a new culinary position for a boy who had previously categorized all cake as acceptable. He washed his hands, narrated the party in the meandering way of children, and then stopped in the middle of his own story. Was someone here? He asked. There's a coffee cup. That woman from the other day, Nath said. From work. Ethan thought about this. The tall one who didn't know if she was your friend. Yeah, Nathan said. That one. Is she your friend now? Nathan picked up the empty cup and took it to the sink. I think she's trying to figure that out, he said. Ethan seemed to find this satisfying. He went to his room to get ready for bed, and came back out 10 minutes later in his pajamas to say goodnight. And Nathan held him for a moment longer than usual in the hallway, the way he sometimes did when something felt like it was shifting. When he could feel the ground underneath them, rearranging itself into something that might, eventually, become solid. 3 weeks later, Nathan accepted the position. It was not a simple decision. He made a spreadsheet, of course he did, and then deleted it, because some things refuse to fit inside a spreadsheet no matter how precise you are. He talked to Ethan, who asked 3 questions. Would he still pick him up from school? Would he still do Taco Fridays? Would the job make him look tired the way the old job did? Nathan answered, yes, and he was going to try very hard to make sure it didn't. He returned to Meridian on a Monday morning in January. His office was different, larger, with a window that faced the street instead of a wall. There was a nameplate on the door that actually said his name. He stood and looked at it for a moment before going in. Diane passed in the hallway, saw him standing there and stopped. How does it feel? She asked. Strange, he said ominously. Good strange. She nodded. She kept walking, but she paused at the end of the hall and said, without turning around, "There's a staff meeting at 9, I want you in it." "For what purpose?" he asked. "Because your name is going to be on the agenda," she said, attributed. In writing, she turned her head slightly, the way it should have been years ago. He watched her go. He went into his office and sat down and pulled up the compliance files he had last touched 7 months ago, and he started reading from the beginning. He had always been good at finding what other people missed, at reading past the surface of a document to the thing it was actually saying. He had done it quietly for 12 years, while other people took the credit. This time, his name was on the door. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. Nathan would be the first to say that. The OIG inquiry was resolved through a process that was long and exhausting, and required Nathan to spend more hours in meetings with attorneys than he would have preferred. There were weeks when he got home later than he wanted to. There were nights when he sat at the kitchen table after Ethan was asleep, not because he was hiding the financial fear this time, but because old habits take time to unlearn. But there were differences. When he needed to leave at 5, he left at 5. When Ethan's class had a performance, Nathan was in the 3rd row. When the school nurse called, the way school nurses sometimes call, about small things that don't matter medically but matter in every other way, Nathan was the one who drove over and sat with his son in the waiting room until the boy felt ready to go back to class. Diane changed too, not all at once and not without effort. She started learning the names of the people who worked for her, actually learning them, past the 6 or 7 senior figures she had always known. She implemented a parent leave policy that hadn't existed before. She stopped scheduling meetings after 4:30. Small things. The kind of things that don't show up in press releases, but that people feel in their daily lives. The difference between a place that uses you and a place that considers you. She and Nathan met once a week, formally in her office, with an agenda and minutes. And occasionally, informally, in the hallway or the elevator, they talked about other things. A book she had read, a question Ethan had asked that Nathan had found unexpectedly hard to answer, a memory of Laura that had surfaced unexpectedly. The way things do. There was nothing dramatic about it, no grand declaration, no sudden revelation, just 2 people, gradually, learning to trust something they had both stopped believing in. In Diane's case, the possibility of genuine connection, and in Nathan's case, the possibility that the world could still sometimes give back. On an evening in April, Diane showed up at Nathan's apartment for the first time since the January offer. This time because Ethan had, entirely on his own initiative, invited her to see a small paper sculpture he had been working on for 3 weeks. It was a paper crane, larger than any he had made before, constructed from a single uncut square of paper and folded through 40-something steps from a tutorial he had watched a dozen times. It sat in the center of the kitchen table, wings open, slightly imperfect, completely itself. Diane looked at it for a long time. "Does it have a name?" she asked. Ethan thought about this with the seriousness the question deserved. "Not yet," he said. "I'm waiting to see what it turns into." Nathan stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hallway, watching his son explain the paper crane to this woman who had once signed paperwork without reading it and was now standing in his kitchen in April, listening to an 8-year-old with complete attention, as if there were nowhere else in the world she was supposed to be. On the shelf by the door, the original 2 cranes were still there, small and slightly asymmetrical, folded from the back of a math worksheet and a page of scratch paper, made by a boy who believed in luck even when the evidence was unkind. Maybe luck wasn't the right word for any of it. Maybe the right word was something simpler. The willingness to keep folding, even when you don't yet know what shape it's going to take. Outside, the April evening was warm enough to leave the window open, and the sound of the street came through. Traffic, a neighbor's radio, a dog somewhere. The ordinary sounds of a life being lived. Nathan had spent 12 years learning to be invisible. He was done with that now. His name was on the door. His son was at the table, and for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, the future felt like something he was walking toward, rather than something he was trying to outrun. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and tell us in the comments, have you ever stayed somewhere too long out of fear? And what finally made you leave? We read everyone.